there's something that has been said. We have this priest shortage. I actually don't know that that's the most precise way of referring to it. It's true there are fewer priests than before, but there are fewer nuns, and there are also fewer married couples who are faithfully living out God's plan for their marriage by not using artificial methods of contraceptives. So we really just have a holiness shortage. Almost no one's living out their vocation well, unfortunately. So if you just live out your vocation well, the effect you will have on the world will be unbelievable.
Welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast. If you are new here, our goal is to create an army of Catholic business owners who are dedicated to carrying out God's will in the world. Today, I am speaking with the creator of Freedom Toons, Seamus Coughlin. He's been creating cartoons for over 15 years and has grown Freedom Toons to over 1 million subscribers on YouTube. He was raised Catholic, but actually fell away from his faith in his teens and eventually came back at the age of 20, but then had a deepening of his faith even further around 24, which is what led him to change some of his political views around libertarianism. And especially because, this is his work, it was very hard because he had to accept the consequences and also change his content as well. So it's a very interesting story we get into there. Our conversation today revolves around a few key themes: how to involve God in the creative process, number one; how submission to the church's authority and ultimately to truth actually frees us and allows us to produce beautiful products, which can then affect the world. We talk about how we can both recognize our nothingness while also leaning into our God-given abilities and create massive change in the world and, what would seemingly look like achieve greatness. Obviously, it's all through God, but it's a very interesting dichotomy we talk about there a lot. And then we talk quite extensively about how we can effectively change the culture in various ways. If you like stories, you're going to like this episode with Seamus because he's very good at telling stories. And as a side note, he's currently fundraising for a full-length animated series called Twisted Plots. If you're interested in helping this crowdfunding campaign to raise the money and the work he's doing to change the culture, I really encourage you to check it out. It's an effective use of your dollars to affect change in the culture. Before we start, if our mission to build an army of Catholic entrepreneurs who will reinsert God into the culture resonates with you, what are you waiting for? Join the Catholic Founders Guild today. It's only $100 a year or $10 a month, so anybody can afford it. Consider this like an association that you join so you can meet others who share this goal. Even if you don't have a lot of time to commit, it's still important to be part of it so that you can be discovered by other Catholic entrepreneurs and that you can discover others through the directory. Also, quick shout out to today's sponsors: Verso Jobs for when you need to hire people who share your mission, and St. Colby Studios for when you need to produce a podcast, but you want it done the right way. Trust me, don't make the same mistakes I did. Use somebody like St. Colby Studios to help you out. And Paraclete VA for when you're looking to hire Catholic overseas talent. Okay, enjoy the show. All right. Welcome to the podcast, Seamus. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well, actually. Tired but energized at the same time. It's an interesting feeling because, as I mentioned to you, I've been running a crowdfunding campaign for a full-length animated show myself and my team are making. And so I've been going from podcast to podcast. I've been traveling nonstop. And so my body is tired, but the feedback we've gotten has been incredibly edifying. We're over 50% of the way to our goal, which is an incredible feeling. So psychologically, totally stimulated, physically wiped. But listen, I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience. You're an entrepreneur, so everybody here knows that feeling of my body is falling apart, but up here I am going at a mile a minute.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a really fascinating experience, especially to do this as a Catholic. I can't imagine what it would be like to be an entrepreneur and go through all of that as a non-Catholic. I think it'd be way harder, I can imagine, unless you just really got a lot of ego, which maybe not uncommon for entrepreneurs. But
you can also be a Catholic and just have a lot of ego too.
Well, that is true. There's plenty of those out there.
Pride is a sin, but nobody's perfect,
Yeah, plenty of those out there, especially on Catholic Twitter. I love to just observe that sometimes. I actually don't love to observe it, but it's interesting.
You know what? Don't notice the speck in the eye of the anime profile picture. Notice the log in the eye of your own. But yes,
exactly.
I agree.
100%. So tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you're doing today, just to give people a bit of background.
So my name is Seamus Coughlin. I have a small business in animation production. Part of what we do is run a YouTube channel called Freedom Toons that creates animated political satire. I also do work with clients like conservative and Catholic organizations that create Catholic or conservative educational cartoons. It's something we've done in the past. And right now I'm actually branching out. So after having produced over 700 animated videos, and with our YouTube channel having amassed over 1 million subscribers and over 290 million views, all with $0 spent on marketing, I feel confident that this is the right time for myself and my team to step out into making larger projects. part of the reason that I'm doing this is because entertainment media for decades has been controlled by people who hate us, who hate our values, who hate our way of life. We need to fight back. And I also know that this is something that audiences genuinely do want. So unfortunately, well, there have been conservatives who have made the very commendable effort to try to create entertainment media. I believe they've made a number of mistakes in terms of execution. I think that for media to be effective, it has to A, be something that's going to appeal to people outside of your group, and B, the moral that you're trying to deliver has to be delivered naturally through the story and through the jokes and not through these ham-fisted monologues or, one character owning another character in a debate. And so that's how we've written this show. I think it is really, really important for Christians, and obviously as a Catholic, particularly Catholics, to take back the entertainment space because we are in the midst of a serious crisis. Technology exists today that allows for stories to be delivered to audiences in the most effective way humanly possible. Strangers are able to place images and noises in your home with a screen that you have mounted on your wall. This is an incredible technology. The potential is near limitless for educating people, and yet the levers that control what is put on that screen are handled almost entirely by people who are enemies of the church, who are enemies of our values as Catholics, who are anti-family. We need to wage the war to take that back, and that's what myself and my team are doing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I am curious to understand a little bit more of your journey in this space because you're clearly very animated by taking back the culture currently. But was your faith always something that was very important to you? Can you talk about the experience of starting? If I understand correctly, you started this before your faith was really, really serious, and then kind of transitions. Like, what was it like before, during, and now after?
So I was raised in a Catholic household, but in my later teens, I fell away. And then when I turned 20, I came back. But when I was 19 is when I actually officially started Freedom Toons. So I'd been working in animation before that, but that's when I decided to launch the political brand. And even though I wasn't taking my faith seriously, even though I was very lukewarm, and I think at moments I would have considered myself an atheist, I was still very much angry about who controlled our culture and what they were doing with it. Because I remember during that period of time where I didn't really believe in my heart, I still recognized that the rules laid out by the Catholic Church for how to live a good life made way more sense than what anyone was putting forward. Even if you don't have a spiritual sense of things, like from a raw economic perspective, from a raw statistical perspective, looking at crime rates, all of those angles, divorce is bad. Pornography is bad. Sex outside of marriage is bad. There's just a lot of data we can point to. And this is, of course, because God doesn't make rules that don't make sense. If we follow God's commandments, this is not the prosperity gospel. I'm not saying that your life will always be great, but we know that societies that follow God's commandments are more likely to be successful than ones that don't. So I remember even as being a teenager, this was in the, 2010s, late aughts, early 2010s. I remember watching like MTV when I'd be at friends' houses and just being so angry and jaded and rolling my eyes about it. Because to me at that time, MTV was like, this is a bunch of creepy 40-year-olds trying to speak for me as a teenager. And every single thing that they're having a teenager do on screen is something that some weird old guy wrote to convince me that that's how I should behave. So I was always looking at it through that lens, and it always made me really sick. And so, I mean, that wasn't that long ago. Again, I'm 30, so I was a teenager, not that long ago. But unfortunately, I think things have actually gotten worse in terms of the entertainment media that's being produced.
It's continuing to just like the examples
degenerate
that they're giving to young kids it's just really, really bad, right? No, we see it happening. Like my in-laws are in New York City, and I happen to, whenever you're riding the subway, you just start to see like or hear what the kids are talking about. And it's like you have no sense of substance in your life, right? The things that you care about, at least what you're talking about on the train, are very surface level, and they're just it's such a waste, right? And people don't have that sense of purpose in life in general,
Well, and this is actually a key point here, because when I was in high school, I know that I was very critical about the media that I was consuming, and I think that the younger generation now is the same way. In fact, I think they're even more critical. You're right that some of them have bought into it, but I think a lot of them are really, really sick of it. And as it's only gotten more disgusting, they've only gotten more angry about it. This is a large subsection of who we need to be trying to reach as Catholics. And you have to have good entertaining media to be able to do that. You have to have media that spreads a positive message. Because firstly, what that cohort is going to do when they see it is they're going to go, A, like, okay, this is not what I'm usually being sold by the media, and B, it's different. They're not necessarily going to go, oh, like a Catholic moral, that's great. Some of them might, but a lot of them are just going to go, okay, this is pushing back against the things that are constantly told to me by people who I know hate me and don't have my best interest in mind.
Yeah. Now, I guess that's very. It's important that we fight it back against it. I'm curious, like from your perspective, though, as the person, as the creator of these things, right? When it sounds like you started Freedom Toons when you were 19. You converted back to Catholicism or reverted, I guess you could say, at 20. And then did your faith grow through the experience of you trying to reconcile the content you create with a Catholic lens? And then has that at all deepened your faith specifically through leaning into the creative and entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So when I was 20, I came back to faith. But obviously, there was a lot that I didn't totally understand, especially as it relates to political theory. And my politics were hardline, hardcore libertarian at that time. I was basically a full-on anarcho-capitalist. And it wasn't until I was probably around 23, 24 that I started attending the Latin Mass regularly. I started hanging out with a group of people who knew a bit more about the faith. I started reading more about the faith myself. And I came to realize that the traditional Catholic understanding of A, what our rights are, B, the relationship between rights and duties that exists metaphysically, and C, what policy measures the church actually suggests or even says Catholics must endorse or support aren't things that line up neatly with a libertarian worldview.
Correct.
So definitely did change the kind of content I made. As I mentioned, I was very libertarian, and this is how people knew me, as a very libertarian person. And at first, when I came back to my faith, again, I didn't totally realize some of the incompatibilities between a hardline libertarian view and Catholic teaching. And then once I did, a couple years down the line, I knew that I had to be clear about what my perspective was. I really thought about it. I really agonized over it because I thought, is there any way this can be compatible? Is there any way I can keep having both of these things? And I just realized there wasn't. And so I announced to people, made it clear, there's a number of things I still agree with libertarians on, but I no longer consider myself a libertarian. And these are some of the reasons. When I was doing podcasts, I started speaking more clearly and boldly on Catholic teaching and what the church says. And it was really scary at first. I was like, well, this is probably the end of my career because everyone knows me as like this libertarian guy, or everyone who does know me knows me as this libertarian guy, and they're going to feel betrayed. But fortunately, it was not. It actually ended up being one of the best things that I ever did. And I would get messages from people thanking me for saying these things, which surprised me. I actually just thought I was going to make everybody angry.
Yeah.
Like, I thought it was just going to upset everybody. And then I was surprised to see that people were not upset. I mean, some number of them were, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
But a lot of people, way more people than I thought, were happy to see it. So that was one way that my work had to change because of my faith. And it ended up, it's interesting, like it ended up being the best thing for me, not just on a spiritual level, and not just in terms of being true to myself, but shockingly enough, it actually ended up being something that like a large subsection of my audience wanted from me.
Yeah, and I would assume also it ended up probably growing your audience in the long run.
It's hard to say, probably to some degree, though.
Yeah.
I think especially so here's where it did. Because so for Freedom Toons, we're creating these political cartoons and we're making social satire. Now, when I do podcasts, so I'm a co-host on Timcast IRL. I'm a recurring co-host, sometimes a guest host. And everyone knows I'm going to talk about Catholic stuff there. So I know I've made a lot of Catholic and also evangelical fans, like a lot of Christians who aren't Catholic but appreciate what I have to say. They appreciate what I say about the unborn and about, marriage and protecting the sanctity of marriage and the transgender issue. So, and to be clear, like even before I came to better understand Catholic teaching, like I was always very outspoken on the pro-life issue, like that was always. But I think speaking more directly about Jesus on some of these podcasts and speaking more about issues that I think other conservative commentators, especially at that time, were unwilling to touch, did gain me more fans in the Catholic and evangelical space, just the Christian space generally.
Are you looking to hire people who actually care about your mission? You should get in touch with Verso Jobs. Verso Jobs is a platform that uses a gamified application process to find candidates who actually have the right skills and mission alignment with your team. Joe and the team at Verso Jobs first understand your needs, then they go out and they headhunt the best candidates and present you with highly aligned profiles in very short order, oftentimes turning around profiles within a few days or a week. They also won't break the bank, so whether you're hiring for your startup, school, parish, or nonprofit, Verso makes it easy to find mission-aligned talent ready to build the kingdom. Visit versojobs.com to get started. That's Verso, V-E-R-S-O jobs.com. To the heights. There's also something I'd ask you to maybe speak about, because I think that a lot of people who are very pro-freedom, right? Especially, this is a very American thing, right? As Catholics, like we have this tension between, I guess you'd say, like Americanism versus being Catholic first versus American first. And we want a lot of times to, talk about ourselves like Neo in the Matrix, right? We've had the red pill.
Yeah.
We want freedom. We want all these things. We want to be able to do what we want. In some ways, submitting to the church is like submitting to slavery, right? Like we are submitting to the authority of the church. Do you have any like experiences with that when you were doing this, and what the actual positive outcomes are when you submit to a higher authority?
Well, everyone submits to a higher authority at some point. It's just a question of what that authority is. You either submit to the truth or you submit to a lie. Those are your only options. So I'm glad that I picked the right choice, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I understand that everyone who's not Catholic is going to say, well, Catholicism isn't true when you did submit to a lie. But at the end of the day, there has to be a higher authority than you.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone wants to believe that they are living their life in a way which orients themselves towards that truth. And so it's funny because, like you said, everyone is obsessed with freedom. And people will say you're a slave to your faith. But here's the thing, the truth sets you free.
Exactly.
And you need the freedom to do the right thing. Like, we as modern people conceive of freedom as a political concept. And it's not. It's much more interior than that. It's much more spiritual. Whether you're free is a question of whether you're capable of choosing the good. So, to give an example here, if I eat donuts all day and sit on my couch and then I balloon out to 400 pounds, and my brother hits the gym every day and he's constantly working out and now he's just absolutely shredded, if he wants to have a cheat day where he sits on the couch and eats donuts, he's free to do that. If I decide I want to have a cheat day where I take a break from my couch lifestyle and go to the gym, it's a lot harder for me to do that, right? When your habits are vicious ones, you become less free because you're less capable of choosing the good. Whereas if you usually do good things, like you're capable of having that cheat day now and again. Now, when I say cheat day, I don't mean to actually go and commit sin or do something vicious. I just mean to do the kind of thing that can be done in moderation that people often take to excess.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. I think it's something I've been trying to understand more lately, is just the idea of like how to be an entrepreneur who, we a lot of times have very big goals, and a lot of times they're money oriented, right? And it's how can we reconcile some of these things with that submission to the church, right? Like, how can I desire quote unquote success in the world while still also trying to imitate Christ, right? How can this is the hardest part for me. I was actually thinking about this today, is like, how can we desire to be despised just like Jesus was, while still even building our businesses? Like, what's the point? Sometimes it's like, what's the point of even building this business? Because am I just doing it to provide for my family? Am I doing it because I want some success? And let's all be honest, like, I think deep down, most of us want recognition, we want to be respected, etc. There's various reasons for it. So it's like that tension to me is very challenging to consider, and I don't have any answers for it, but I appreciate you talking about it. I do want to ask you about this idea of creativity, though, because I think we don't necessarily have a lot of creatives on the podcast, but would be curious how you perceive, if you ever have challenges coming up with ideas for the cartoons.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And if you do, like, how do you solve that? Like, what are the kind of core pieces that you do to get into the creative vibes, if you will, and then what role does God play in that?
Well, one thing I want to mention first, you said you don't have many creatives on the show. Something Jordan Peterson says is like, creatives, like artists and entrepreneurs, have the same temperament, which I think is true. And I have found that as someone who does creative work and is also an entrepreneur, I'm flexing the same muscle when I do both things. So I think there's tremendous overlap there. As far as writing goes and the creative process, that's a tough one because, we do a cartoon every week on Freedom Toons. Sometimes multiple cartoons a week. Almost no one does that, by the way, because animation is really expensive. It's really hard to do animation on a weekly basis or twice weekly basis. And it's also hard to write enough content to do that on a weekly or twice weekly basis. And so A lot of it is just forcing yourself to write. One of the difficult things, one of the horrible things about the YouTube algorithm is you have to constantly upload to keep your channel relevant. So you do have to put the emphasis on quantity. One of the great things about the YouTube algorithm is it forces you to upload frequently. So you have to put emphasis on quantity, because there's a lot of videos that I'm very happy with that I just never would have made if the algorithm was not forcing me to put something out every week. And so you sit there, you try to write something down, you have writer's block, you scroll Twitter to kind of see what people are talking about, what the hot issues are, what people might want to see covered, what's trending, go to CNN, go to Fox, see what the different networks are saying. You still haven't come up with anything. And then you just got to make a decision, hone in on something, and just start writing. And that's usually what I do, is I'll just start writing. And one thing that hit me probably about 2 years ago is, even when you're experiencing the worst writer's block of your life, at any point in time, you can be like 5 to 15 minutes away from the best idea you've ever had. And that writer's block is just the path you've got to go down to get to that idea. You just have to do it, though. You just got to make a decision, and you just got to start doing it. And one thing I can say as a creative that I think entrepreneurs will be able to relate to is, once you get that idea that you're excited about, it just flows out of you. They say, oh, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. It's like, that's not true. But most of the work and most of the heavy lifting, I find, is pushing through the writer's block, pushing through the indecisiveness, and getting to the point where it's all just flowing out of you. And I find that to be the case for writing, where once I have the idea, once that thing clicks, it just comes out so effortlessly. And so I think that a huge part is just making the decision to start and forcing yourself to do it.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk about writer's block, and it's gotten to the point where, again, because A, we do a video every week, sometimes two, and B, because I've also been writing a lot in the background. I've got screenplays I've written, I've got shows I've written. Like, the idea of having writer's block, it's not that the sensation is foreign to me. Like, everyone's going to have writer's block, but you can push past the feeling that writer's block means you're not able to write, because it doesn't actually mean that. Writer's block just means you haven't found the idea yet. It's like, well, when you haven't found the idea yet, that's probably the most important time for you to be writing, because you got to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's very challenging. I prefer to do podcasts because it's not, you don't have to have as formalized thoughts as you create it. But whenever I do the newsletter for Mondays, it's usually, there's some days where it's like, oh, this just came to me because I thought about this thing in mass because of the readings or whatever, and it's like super easy. And then there's times where it's like, it's, you know, it's Sunday night and I got to publish tomorrow morning, and I'm like, dang, I can't find anything. You're just writing. And then I have this issue where I think I have an idea because it seems to make sense, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't click in your heart. And then before you know it, eventually after writing like 3 things, you're like, do the third draft, and then you finally get something, right? And like you said, it eventually comes to you. So I appreciate it. Do you have any particular habits or routines, things that you do to try to integrate the Holy Spirit into how you write, or like, do you open up to that side of things? Like, what is your process on that front?
That's a really good question. I mean, sometimes I'll pray about these topics, and as I'm making a video, obviously, you know, I have a conscience. So in the back of my mind, there's like, maybe this joke is too far, maybe I should remove that, or maybe I can't make a joke about that. So I would say that's probably where the Holy Spirit comes in. I have certainly prayed about the larger projects that I'm now involved with. So, for example, the crowdfunding campaign we launched for Twisted Plots, and the fact that I do want to make this full-length animated show is something I did pray about a lot. It's something I thought and prayed about for years. And so I definitely integrate the Holy Spirit and ask for his vision, ask for him to open my eyes when it comes to deciding which big project we take next. With the Freedom Toons stuff, because we do it so often, it's so fly by the seat of my pants. I've just got to make a decision really quickly on a lot of this stuff. And to be clear, like, it's really important to involve God in all of that too. And so I'm not dismissing that. And like I said, a lot of where I believe God comes in there is just like my conscience, and when and where I am willing to comment on a particular issue, probably. And then, when it comes to the larger projects, it's like, do I even do this at all? Because for Freedom Tunes, the thing is, like, I know I have to do a video each week.
Yeah.
And sometimes
It's a routine. It's
two.
part of the thing you're used to.
Exactly.
But investing in the other things, the big things that are new, that's to me some of the biggest challenges. Like with what
Yeah.
I do, I have a business I got to run, right? And I have the Catholic Founders thing, and there's 2 things I got to put out every single week, and then a couple monthly pieces, right? But it's like, should I invest in these other ideas? And that's the hardest part, is to decide whether or not it's worth effectively distracting yourself from the other things, or finding some way to fit in extra time. Like, you can't make more hours in a week, right?
No.
So that's the hard part. I really struggle with that one, because there's just so many ideas of what you could do, but it's like, what's really valuable and worth doing.
And if you could fit extra hours in the week, I would use them to catch up on sleep, honestly. So it's like, it's a no-win situation as far as work goes.
I've given up on that. One of my friends, he's a big fan of Gabriel Garcia Moreno, he was the president of Ecuador, and he got to a point where he was like only sleeping 4 or 5 hours of a day. And he was like, we need to work towards that, right? And I was like, you know what? I actually changed my perspective. Yeah, I'm going to work towards only getting, 4 hours of sleep, and then I'll get more done. I'll be like Trump or something. I don't know. We'll see. But hopefully that's the ego. I'm curious to change topics a little bit. So what you're doing is, not necessarily explicitly Catholic with Freedom Tunes, right? It's like you're putting the lens of truth into things here. But a lot of Catholics or people just in general, when they have their conversion, their reversion, their deepening of faith, they want to go out and they want to build something that's Catholic, right? I'm building the Catholic build a Catholic Airbnb or Catholic Uber or whatever. But I think it's very silly sometimes, because like, what are we doing here? Like, we need to build. The reason why the culture collapsed effectively is because people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, the people who are building the technology of the future, were not viewing things through the lens of truth, and especially through the Catholic lens. So can you just speak to this idea of like building these kind of siloed, I don't know what they call them, parallel economy things, versus just building good companies and being Catholics who are building good things?
Dude, it's hugely important. It's hugely important. As Catholics, we're called to be in the world, but not of the world. I guess depending on your vocation, right? Let's add that caveat. But what we need to be doing is we need to be creating products, and that ranges from media to furniture to food to technology, products that are undeniable, that are good. Think about this. What did St. Joseph do? What did Jesus do? They did carpentry. I'm not going to say that they never decided to make anything that was of use for religious reasons, right? But it's important to know that St. Joseph, who was, as far as men go, aside from Christ, as far as pure men go, like the holiest man who ever lived, he was a carpenter. As a Catholic, your work should sanctify you, and you should use it to sanctify the world in some way, but it does not have to be explicitly religious in order for you to be able to do so. This is a statue my father got for me that I keep in my office. This is Saint Jose Maria Escriva.
Amazing.
For those of you who don't know, he's the founder of Opus Dei. He's an incredible saint, and a huge part of his mission was helping people to understand that you can be sanctified through your work, and that we need lay people. We need lay people in the world spreading the truth of the faith, A, through the goodness of what they make, B, through their example to the non-Catholic people who they're in the workplace with. And then I would argue with media, which is what I'm creating. Also, we need to be influencing people with good stories that carry a good message. Like Christ told parables to teach people. And we also see throughout the Bible different moral lessons being taught through a story. That's indispensable. That's how humans learn. You can give people stats and facts and information, talking points, and I'm not saying that there's no value in that, because there is and there can be, but the way most people learn is through story. And so if you as a Catholic decide, I want to make Catholic media, I only want to do Bible stories, I only want to do movies about saints, that's great. That's beautiful. That very well could be your vocation. I encourage people to do that. But there's 2 things I'm going to mention with that. Firstly, if you're doing that, you need to make sure that those movies are on par in terms of entertainment value with what Hollywood's producing. It's not enough to just go, I'm doing the Catholic version of it. It has to be really good. Secondly, if you are a Catholic and you're not interested in telling stories about the Bible or about saints, and you just want to make good movies, we need that. We really, really need that. That's part of what I'm trying to do. Because for so long, Hollywood has chipped away at our culture by creating films that have some goodness in them, that have some truth in them, but they slip their values in a very insidious way that undermines the moral fabric of the audience, because they walk away having learned a lesson which was not as good or wholesome as it could have been. So one example that I use for this is the films that Judd Apatow has produced. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, and I don't recommend these films. I saw these when I was younger. You should not watch them. There's nudity in them. But if you have seen them, they're kind of a good example of how this all breaks down. 40-Year-Old Virgin. That's actually a film about a man who's a virgin, and I'm going to spoil it, right? But he's a man who's a virgin who gets married and then loses his virginity. That's actually, on paper, a great story. And that's like a surprisingly wholesome story for a modern filmmaker to tell. You look at Knocked Up. Going to spoil this one too. That's a film about two people in their early 20s who fornicate, and then she gets pregnant. But they end up getting together and raising the child, right? Again, that's also like kind of a wholesome story. They don't end the life of their unborn child, and they decide to raise the baby together. They take on the responsibility of their actions. But here's what those films do. First of all, they're full of nudity and they're full of raunchy humor. But most importantly, I would say, they do everything they can to let the audience know that the character was not morally obligated to behave quite as wholesomely as they did throughout the story. So in 40-Year-Old Virgin, everyone's having sex outside of marriage in that film. And there's never a statement made that you shouldn't do that. And again, the statement is made through showing nudity and through these kinds of jokes that it's perfectly fine to do. With Knocked Up, there's an entire series of jokes about abortion and about them, potentially getting an abortion, someone talking to them about why they should get an abortion. So these are good examples of what Hollywood does, which is they'll tell a story which, like, at its core is still morally satisfying in a way because, listen, if Knocked Up ends with them getting an abortion, or 40-Year-Old Virgin ends with him like becoming a degenerate, it's not as satisfying a film. It's not as charming as a film. You don't walk away from it feeling satisfied or happy with the story. But that's a problem for Hollywood, right? Because they want to change the culture in a negative way.
Yeah.
And I don't think
they find ways to subvert it.
Exactly.
But this is...
I just want to make this point. I don't think Judd Apatow sat down and was like, how do I brainwash everyone? I think he just told the story from his heart, and that's what is in his heart. And we need Catholics telling stories from their heart.
Hey guys, quick interruption to tell you about some of the upcoming events that we have, so grab your calendars and note these down. We are hosting a dinner in Chicago on November 4th for Catholic business owners. This is going to be a small gathering of people, and we're still actually solidifying the details of where this is going to be, but if you are in the Chicago area or going to be visiting and you'd like to attend, you can apply to attend using the Luma event link in the show description. Again, some of those details may end up changing, so just keep in mind that this is going to be somewhere in Chicago. A small gathering of Catholic founders. On November 20th, there was another gathering of Catholic entrepreneurs in San Francisco taking place. This should be a one-day summit, roughly. We're still working out the details of what that is in partnership with a friend of ours. If you'd like to attend, reach out to me directly so that I can send you further details, or if you'd like to help organize or sponsor it, also let me know. I can pass along your information to the organizer. If you're in New York City, we'll be hosting a Catholic Founders Dinner on the 9th of December. So we are still pulling all together all the nuances of what this is going to be. It's most likely going to be the 9th of December, but if you'd like to attend or you can help organize it in some way, maybe you've got a space that we can let us use, or a restaurant you suggest, or you'd like to sponsor, please reach out to me directly. We need your help to really pull these things together and to create in-person connection with other Catholic entrepreneurs so we can learn from each other. It's just all part of our mission. So we look forward to seeing you at these events, and of course our topic events coming up in November, and our expert events coming up in November as well. So thank you so much for attending these and helping out in any way you can. Back to the show. Yes, and this is super important because there's 2 points here. So number one is, if you're going to tell something from your heart, or build products, just generally speaking, from your heart, and do things, run your company from your heart, you cannot do this properly unless your heart is first transformed, right? And this is the thing that I think a lot of people do. They want to transform the culture. They want to change and make the world a better place, which is great in terms of, like, good effort, right? But I believe it's the spiritual combat says that the most important thing any man could do to help the world is to transform their own heart, to allow God, I should speak. You can't actually do it yourself, to allow God and to ask for the grace that God will transform your own heart, because out from that flows your products, your words, your actions. All of these things come from that. And the second point here is that again, these products, the reason why you touched on it here, the reason why they work well is if you're Catholic and you're doing things well, you're doing good work, etc. That is basically done through the lens of truth. When something is done in a truthful way, it touches the heart of a person because it's a transcendental, right? And they can't explain why, especially non-Catholics, maybe atheists, whatever. Like they can't explain why these things touch them. Like when you see a good thing being done to a stranger on the street, there's like a certain level of dopamine that you raise because there's reasons for this. It's all spiritual. God created this in a certain way. So I would argue this wasn't your point, but I would take this a little bit further, that Catholics ought to be able to have much better businesses from a loyalty perspective, from a customer acquisition perspective, because if they do good things, their products will be good, they'll be perceived as good, and their customers will tell other people about them. You know, I talked about this with Tim Connors at one point, that they will reduce their customer acquisition costs, because if you got all these people telling about, you know, your product, you can reduce the cost of acquiring a customer. So there's so many benefits here that I think that people just forget, and they don't recognize that this is the outcome. And I should say, you should never do these things because there's a better, you know, financial outcome for you. You should do them because it's the right thing to do, of course.
They're good, yeah.
But this is it just goes to show that when things are rightly ordered, the outcomes are much better.
No, listen, I completely agree with you. And as far as media goes, this is also why media produced by Catholics or that Catholics have heavily influenced comes off a little bit differently. So if you don't mind, I want to make a comparison between some films here. We've all seen Titanic. Let's admit it, fellas. We've all seen it. That film on paper is horrible, horrible. This woman has a fiance who she cheats on with this homeless drifter, and to add insult to injury, he draws a nude picture of her wearing her engagement gift and puts it in her fiance's safe. She puts it in his safe with like a cruel little remark, like, now we can both stay locked up in your safe. Then she's on a lifeboat. She jumps off the lifeboat to get back onto the ship when she would have lived. Jack eventually, spoiler alert, guys, you know, Jack dies saving her. Like, in her whole character arc, the film kind of fools you into thinking she has a character arc because she goes from one kind of selfish person to another kind of selfish person. But she doesn't really actually grow, as evidenced by the fact that at the end of the film, we find out that the entire framing device, which is her being on a ship to speak to treasure hunters who are looking for the diamond that she secretly had the whole time. And after she tells them this whole story, she secretly drops the diamond off the side of the boat. Doesn't give it to her granddaughter who's cared for her whole life. Doesn't sell it, give the money to charity. Doesn't give it to the people who just indulged her for hours. Like, this is, on paper, a bad story. But when I say this, some people are going, oh, you're a grumpy curmudgeon, because the reality is you watch that film and you don't feel that way. Like, you watch that film and you're like, the acting's phenomenal. The special effects are incredible. 30 years later, they still hold up. The music is beautiful. And so what James Cameron has been able to do, because he's an absolute master of his craft, is he's been able to tell this story, which again, on paper, is in many ways a bad story, but to be clear, which does have some morally positive elements. For example, Jack dies for her. We all know it's a beautiful and good thing for a man to lay down his life for a woman. So there's truth there. And that's probably one of the most important plot points, right? If not the most important plot point. So that sticks out to people as something good and wholesome, even though there were so many bad things in the film. And so the reason I bring all of this up is because filmmaking, it sort of hypnotizes you if it's done well. And it gets you to subconsciously accept things. Like, you're accepting adultery throughout this whole film. You're accepting fornication. You're accepting an affair. It's really bad. But listen, you don't want, you want them to get together just on an emotional level because of how it's pulled off. So again, you can reflect on the film later and go, oh, that was bad. And I don't think James Cameron wrote this film going, how do I convince people adultery is good? I just think James Cameron, again, was writing from his heart. Now, let's take another film. I'm actually going to take a trilogy here. We look at the Lord of the Rings films, okay? Now, James Cameron's Titanic is the highest grossing film of all time when it's released, and one of the highest grossing, I think it's still one of the highest grossing films, and if I'm not mistaken, it's the highest grossing romance film. Lord of the Rings was also carried out with an incredible degree of competence. Peter Jackson made these books, which were widely referred to as unfilmable into movies. It's one of the wonders of the modern world, actually. The fact that he was able to make The Lord of the Rings into these really, really incredible movies, and that they were so morally wholesome. Now, the thing about Lord of the Rings is you don't, even though you do feel all sorts of different emotions watching it, you don't feel manipulated. The values in that film are so good and so wholesome, because even though things were done in the movies that didn't align perfectly with Tolkien's vision. They were very morally good. And so you see films like that, and rather than being entertained and hypnotized, and rather than just feeling the emotions that the creators want you to feel, you're actually built up. Like, those films refresh you in a specific way. I think anyone who's seen them knows what I'm talking about. They build you up, and that's what good art is supposed to do. It's not just supposed to hypnotize you in a way where you feel entertained for a couple hours and then walk away with a more jaded view of adultery, right? Or a more permissive view of sexual immorality. Like, a film should leave you in some ways different than when it found you, but in a positive direction. And when a film does that for us, we never forget it. We never forget it. There's other films that are not as morally decent as Lord of the Rings, but which also have a lot of truth in them. As you mentioned, Shawshank Redemption's a great example. I won't get too deep into the analysis, but Stephen King is not friendly to conservative Christians, Christianity. And the director of that film, I don't believe he was not trying to make a Christian film, but that's one of the highest rated films of all time. And it's a film with astounding Christian parallels, even though they weren't intended. So again, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, I really would watch it. But Andy Dufresne, is the story of an innocent man condemned for crimes that he did not commit, who enters into the realm of the guilty, and everyone in this prison is fascinated by this guy. Everybody there, the people at the top, the people at the bottom. They're like, who is he? They're trying to size him up. They're trying to figure him out. They think they've got him pinned down. They think they understand it, but they don't quite understand him. And through the course of the film, even as an audience member, you sort of fail to understand, because you see him building a library, helping them learn to read, getting one of them a GED, and you sort of think, oh, well, this is a story about social justice. But then, at the end of the film, you realize that the real work was being done behind the scenes in a certain sense. Like, he's tunneling out of the jail slowly throughout the course of the film. And then he escapes, which firstly, if you want to talk about like entering by the narrow gate, right? We've got a perfect way of understanding that there. He literally squeezes through the wall and then squeezes through the pipe and gets out clean on the other side. But another really important element of the story, and let's also remember, he was gaining all of this wealth outside of prison with this other identity. So he wears a new identity and is able to like use the treasures that he stored up through his sufferings. It is just a remarkably Christian film without even intending to be. And the most striking thing is that his best friend throughout the film, Red, is the only person who leaves prison with him. At the end, he ends up escaping and they're reunited. And the fascinating thing about that is Red is the only character in the film who's aware of his own guilt. Everyone else says, I didn't do anything wrong. My lawyer dropped the ball. Red says, I'm the only guilty man in Shawshank, and he's the only one who gets out with Andy. I mean, that is a remarkably Christian film, even though it didn't intend to be. And so we watch that, and we're so moved emotionally by it, and we don't even really know why. But it's a beautiful and edifying film, and then when you take a moment to think about it, you go, this was a Christian movie. It didn't mean to be, but it was.
At this point, you've heard me mention our mission many times. We are building an army of Catholic entrepreneurs who are committed to reinserting God into the culture. Well, if this mission resonates with you, we want you to be a part of Catholic Founders Guild. You can think of this kind of like an association of Catholic business owners who share the same mission and who take this idea of bringing God into the culture extremely seriously. We are currently around 50 members and growing quickly. So when you become a member, you can find other Catholics to do business with, to buy services from, to invest in, and alongside. All of this is possible with our member directory. On top of that, we have 2 to 3 calls every month with the community. One to discuss a particular topic like stewardship or competition. One to learn from an expert and ask them questions, like our recent one on the tax changes with Chris Royalty, or on how to grow your business in a virtuous way with Ellen Twomey. The other that we have is a more open-ended community hangout call. There's no specific time commitment for this either, so if you want to be heavily involved, you're welcome to. But if you just want to be a member of the guild and don't have time to attend the calls, all we ask is that you stay committed to this mission of building for God rather than for yourself, and be open to meeting other members of the guild when they reach out. To join, the first step is to upgrade to a paid membership on our Substack. Think of this kind of like a Patreon if you're not familiar. Just go to catholicfounders.com/subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, so anybody can afford it. it. Oh, and I forgot to mention, many of the members have ended up finding customers from within the group within a few months of joining. So what I'm saying is you're likely going to get your $100 back, if not in direct sales, at least in other value and advice from the guild. Join the Catholic Founders Guild today. All right, see you on the inside. Yeah, this is fascinating. I haven't seen that movie for ages, and I appreciate your ability to recall these things and to point out the story in them. This is not something I intended to ask, but I think it's interesting because you seem to have a very good ability to do this. Is in movies, there's usually, because it's unintentionally, there's moments where you kind of recognize that a line was crossed or a conversion happened of some sort. Like there's like these quote unquote key moments. And I oftentimes wonder how we can understand these in our own life and how we can kind of, I don't know, I'm not trying to say like make our lives into movies, but how we can kind of bring back some of that old world mentality, the things you might see like the old Italian grandmas do in movies where it's like they have a sit down with their grandson or whatever, and they have these like moments. Do you know how we can bring that kind of, I don't know, traditional like old school mentality back?
No, I mean, listen, it's a great question because, like you said, we don't want to make our lives into movies, but the way we understand the world is through story. And so whether we want to admit it or not, we are understanding our lives through that lens. Film is the dominant way that stories are told in this day and age, and people do think of themselves as the main characters in their own films because film is how we understand story today, and story is how we understand the world. And so one really important thing about the big moments that happen in films is they have to be earned. What separates a good movie from a bad movie is whether it was written and executed competently enough for you to feel what you're supposed to feel with the characters. Because for some movies, they'll try to have that big moment where the character changes their perspective or makes a really important decision. And you know the filmmakers want you to feel it, but you just don't. You're not with it. You're like, okay, that was cheesy. The reason you feel that way when you're watching a film is because the person making the film, either, the writer or the director or someone along the line, they didn't breadcrumb you in the proper way to foreshadow that decision or to lead you to it. And these things can't just pop up out of nowhere. So even though a film is about change in some sense, most films follow one of two patterns, right? So like for most good movies, the main character changes, right? He's one way at the beginning, one way at the end. Now, I just mentioned Shawshank, and that's not exactly what happens in Shawshank. Shawshank does a different thing, which is the character mostly stays the same, but he changes the world around him. That's another really powerful way to tell a story. It's not done as often, but when it's done well, it's really satisfying. Forrest Gump's another great example of that. He does change to some degree, but that's mostly film about him changing the world, as opposed to his own character development. So I would say in our own lives, it's important to remember that we want things to happen for us instantly. We want them to happen right away. We want these big dramatic moments. We want change to come quickly when it's change that we desire. But you don't want your story to be cheesy, right? Like, you have to work towards these things. Mm-hmm. In the same way that a director of a film has to sort of work towards it, you just got to realize that day to day, you got to keep making certain decisions that put you in the direction that you want to move in, and be aware of the fact that it's not all going to happen at once. And if it did all happen at once, it might not be such a good story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is also especially important for entrepreneurs to recognize, right? Like I find myself at times wondering like, oh man, like why can't I just have the outcome right now? But it's like, it's not going to be, it's not going to be, it's not going to be as good if it was overnight, right? You even see this with like the TikTok stars, right? Like they have this kind of overnight explosion, and it's obvious they have no character built up because it wasn't something that they earned, right? It was kind of like a luck thing or whatnot. And there's the other times where people build the character. So we have to lean into that as entrepreneurs, that recognizing that there is this time, this experience. I mean, even think about it. Jesus, he could have done whatever he wanted, but he spent 3 years in his ministry after waiting 30 years of just like being obedient to his family and doing things in a way that, like, can you imagine? Like I'm 26. Like I can't imagine the idea of sitting around and being just sitting with my parents and being obedient to them for 30 years. Like I would be like, what is happening? My life is running past me, right? But this type of way we can look at it and see through our entrepreneurship journeys. Along this line, this is going to be a relatively big question. I think I know we're running up on time here. I hope you don't mind.
No, hit me.
Is on this idea of our lives, kind of treating like our lives like a movie and this main character energy type of thing. How do you view this idea of ambition and achievement? Okay, now let me set this up a little bit more.
Yeah.
God created each of us in a very specific moment of time. He gave us, we were born to this time of history, to these particular parents in this geography. and all of the people surrounding our parents, those friend groups, etc. All of these things are like us being dropped into this elaborate movie scene where we have to figure out what the purpose of our life is. What is like we have to come into that main character thing. And if we allow ourselves to set into to step what he has planned for us, outside of us, we have all universal calling to get to heaven, and then we have our vocation, and then we have our secondary vocation. And this part is the hardest part to understand usually because it's not as clear, because it's always unique to the individual. But once you start to go down this, like for example, I think this is good for you to think about and answer, is you've achieved a very good level of success with your Freedom Toons channel. But if you completely let this up to God, this could hypothetically become this particular thing. It could be something else, right? Like Elon Musk rolls one thing into the next. How do you lean into this I'm created for a very unique thing, and God wants to use me if I allow him to use me as a tool for his work in the world? How can you lean into this while still maintaining the humility and the recognition that is not yours? I don't know if this question exactly
that's a
makes
great
sense,
question.
but I'm just trying to the steward who did well over one thing and got set over 10 cities, etc.
Well, to quote Father Ripperger, humility is it's not thinking you're bad, it's knowing your place and taking it. And so just recognizing the skill set that you have and trying to deduce from that what God wants you to do is humble. It's very humble. Now, where you'd be lacking humility is if you were to say, I am better than a person who has a less interesting or less prestigious or less fun job or something like that. That's where you'd be lacking in humility. But it takes all kinds. God wants all of us to be doing what he created us to do. Like you mentioned, we've all got this little piece of history and a very brief moment to change it. That's what he gives us, a brief moment to come to him and have our souls saved. And it's important for us to keep in mind that that is the final end. He wants us to do things to change the world, and those things that he wants us to do are also arguably primarily for the sake of us saving our own souls. So part of the reason the world has fallen apart, and I've mentioned this before, I gave a talk at YAF a while ago where I said to the students, the world's totally backwards in certain ways, right? Because we have food that makes us feel less satisfied. We have medicine that makes us more sick. We've got news infrastructure that doesn't tell us the news. It actually lies to us. Basically, everything is flipped on its head. And the reason things are flipped on their head is because we're fallen creatures. And if you don't put God at the center of something, it's not as if you fail at it or you fall short. You actually end up doing the opposite of what you set out to do. I firmly believe that. And I think we can observe that in the world around us. Again, to carry on with what I was saying, we have educational institutions that make people dumber. We've got entertainment that actually makes us more bored with the world. Everything does the opposite of what it's supposed to do because God's not at the center of it. So if God's at the center of your life, he's going to be at the center of everything you do. If you intentionally try to keep him there and you ask him to help you to keep him there, when you're creating things as a Catholic, they're going to do what they're supposed to do instead of falling short. So to go back to what you were saying earlier and kind of bring it full circle, it's not just that the world needs Catholics in these spheres because we need to be evangelizing. Of course, that's the most important thing, but also things need to work. And our culture has moved so far away from God that pretty soon here, we're only going to be able to make things that do the opposite of what they're supposed to do. And it's going to be Catholics who are ensuring that things actually work properly.
Yeah, I think this is really important because this comes down to everything. It's not just basic, morality can't be separated. This idea of separation of church and state, somebody can be the president and still make a decision that's morally reprehensible because, they have to run the country. No, that's just so stupid because we're judged as individuals, as we all are, right? We're not some amorphous logo floating around in the abyss, right? God will be judging you individually on the last day.
And by the way, if you want to say, oh, I have this political position as a Catholic, but it's not my personal position. All right, well then, I guess you'll be a political prisoner in hell.
Exactly, yeah. You can't separate these things. One thing you mentioned is you said that maybe not everybody's called to a certain, obviously God calls us uniquely to specific things, but you said that we're all called to change the world. And I think that some people would push back on this. They would say, hey, not everybody's called to change the world. I'm just called to, have my family and live in the Midwest and be chilling and have a nice time. But if you think about it, that's not even true for the smallest of people, right? If you look at Saint Therese of Lisieux, who arguably lived one of the smallest lives ever, right? Very short, not only, and also in a very contained situation, and tried to live this little way of doing everything and small things with great love. That in itself is a very little thing, but it changed the world. So in any way, regardless of what level of publicity, let's say, you're called to, you are called to change the world. So anybody who's listening who doesn't think that they're called to a lot, you're kidding yourself, because God did not create you to be just like an NPC. Like, you're not here
That's
to be an
right.
NPC, right? And I just think that we should really lean into this. I love to think about the idea of just the transformation of St. Paul, right? From going from the side. He's a very gregarious person, I guess, before or his conversion, of course, because he did all these crazy bad things. But afterwards, like, and after the descent of the Holy Ghost upon the apostles, then you see them just like go from complete timid men to just going out and changing the world. And I think that we need to recognize this as entrepreneurs, that we can achieve so much that we don't even believe we
That's right.
personally cannot imagine the amount that we can achieve. But if we trust it in God's hands, we don't have to overthink it. We just lean into whatever God is calling us to, whatever he's putting in front of us, and focus on, like we said before, transforming our own hearts. We can transform the culture. So I think the last thing I'd like to wrap up with before rapid fire would be on this idea of culture. You've talked a lot about media, right? But if we want to retake the culture outside of just media, what are some of the other ways that you think that can be done? Specifically, if there's any entrepreneurs listening who say, hey, I want to be able to fund these projects or whatever, like, what are some of the ways that we can take back the culture?
That's a great question. So I want to clarify that, yes, absolutely. When I talk about changing the world, I don't mean in the sense that some activist public school teacher would tell their students they have to change the world, which is essentially just a violation of subsidiarity, right? You need to extend yourself out to things way beyond your reach that you'll never be able to affect and just kind of scream at a wall instead of taking care of the people around you who you have actual responsibilities to. And that's really at the heart of it. The way you change the world is by living out the duties according to your state in life. God gave you a vocation. Live that vocation out. There's something that has been said. We have this priest shortage. I actually don't know that that's the most precise way of referring to it. It's true there are fewer priests than before, but there are fewer nuns, and there are also fewer married couples who are faithfully living out God's plan for their marriage by not using artificial methods of contraceptives. So we really just have a holiness shortage. Almost no one's living out their vocation well, unfortunately. So if you just live out your vocation well, the effect you will have on the world will be unbelievable. Like, you don't even realize how much you're going to change. But of course, the center of the bullseye is not changing things. The center of the bullseye is holiness, and you'll certainly get to holiness. Because here's what you got to remember. Your soul is going to be here for all of eternity. It's going to exist for all of eternity. And it's going to be in one place or the other. When all of the stars in the sky have burnt out, your soul is still going to exist. The soul of your child is still going to exist. The soul of every single person you ever interacted with in your life is going to exist, in the things that you to them or with them or for them will be in their memory. So everything you do is important.
Are you a Catholic business owner trying to get more leads? Launching a podcast might be the best move that you haven't made yet. St. Colby Studios helps Catholic entrepreneurs launch professional, mission-aligned podcasts that build trust and increase leads. Their team walks with you every step of the way, from strategy and recording to branding and editing, so you can launch your podcast in under 90 days. And because you're a Catholic Founder listener, you'll get 20% off all services for the rest of the year of 2025. Just mention the show when you reach out. 158 million people listen to podcasts every month, and that's just in the U.S. Your ideal customer may already be listening to a competitor's podcast. Visit stcolbystudios.com to schedule your free consult today. That's spelled out, Saint, S-A-I-N-T, colbystudios.com to schedule your free consult today. Thank you, St. Colby Studios, for sponsoring this episode of Catholic Founders. All right, back to the show. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I really appreciate that. I think that's positive. So let's go back then to the culture question. How can we change the culture outside of the media pieces?
Like I said, really just loving your family. Word spreads quickly. You have a bigger sphere of influence than you think. Talking about things to the people around you. Like, listen, I'm very blessed. I have an amazing dad, and I have an amazing mother too. And the things that they taught me as a child. Look, now I'm creating media. I'm very blessed to have this very large platform. I owe that in large part to the way I was brought up, and the things I say are in large part influenced by the fact that I had good parents who took care of me. So your sphere of influence, just as an individual, is going to expand in ways that you could never possibly realize. And then as far as what you can do in like a more direct sense, obviously, we should be voting in elections. Obviously, we should be supporting people who we think are doing good things. I firmly believe that we should be supporting media that we think is good media that's going to change the world. So I would suggest that people do that. But I really do think the way that you change the world, it just starts in your own home. It just starts with like going to work every day and providing for your family, or staying home with your children, raising them and caring for them and teaching them well. I think it was Chesterton who said the most extraordinary thing in the world is just an ordinary family. I firmly believe that that's true, because even when it comes to changing the world, think about it. Like, even when it comes to changing the world,
Yeah.
with everything that you or I or any other entrepreneur is trying to do, ultimately, the focus of our career is actually providing for our family. There's a lot that I want to do with this business. I want to make movies. I want to make TV shows. I think it's going to be incredible as we start to expand into those things. But if those things get in the way of me being able to faithfully live out my vocation in life, then I have to take a step back. So what that communicates is actually the stuff that you're doing at home is always going to be way more important than any of the other stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's very easy to want to, like I said, like I just fell into it with partially in asking the question, like we want to achieve these great things with what we do, but in many cases, like we said, all the way back to allowing God to transform your own heart is what's going to transform the most, because you don't necessarily, it's almost like autopilot. Like if you allow God to transform your heart, the rest kind of flows from there, and you don't even have to think about it, honestly, right? Not to say that people can't go take, intentional ways about this, but I appreciate that. Let's wrap up here with some rapid fire. So what is your favorite piece of scripture, specifically as it relates to entrepreneurship or creativity?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think as far as, I haven't really thought in terms of like entrepreneurship and creativity. I think probably the idea of the talents and the idea that you actually are held accountable by the master for the way that you use your talents. There's something kind of frightening about that. And I do think about that from time to time. I also think about this idea of man having to toil because of the sins of Adam, and also of women having pain during childbirth. I think it's very interesting that the curse of the fall directly affects our productivity, our ability to create things.
Also
And
our main calling too, if you think about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that kind of also gets into what we were saying earlier when it comes to writer's block. Like, to me, that's part of that toil where you're sort of working, but it feels like you're not getting anything done. And then ultimately, this is more like of an overarching theme than a specific verse I'm going to reference. But again, as I said earlier, I firmly believe that anytime we create anything, we're participating with God and his creativity. And so the more we align ourselves with him and do things the way that we understand he would want us to do them, the better what we're going to make will.
Yeah. The idea of being co-creators is something so fascinating, especially like inside of marriage, but also as entrepreneurs. Like the fact that that's what it means to be created in his image and likeness is it never gets dull for me to think about that. Just how fun it is that we can, by being creators of some sort, right? We are leaning into our godliness in a way. So I talk about that a lot on the show. Who's your favorite entrepreneur?
That's a really interesting question. I guess it depends on like who counts as an entrepreneur, because I tend to more think about artists who I like. I mean, as a kid, I was really inspired by Charles Schultz. Loved Charles Schultz and his work. I know this is going to sound crazy. We were talking about Steve Jobs earlier and a lot of the issues with him, and the fact that him being as in charge of cultural development and technological development as he was as a non-Catholic was really bad. I think there's a lot that Steve Jobs did that was really bad. I still find him to be a fascinating figure. And I'm kind of a tech nerd, so I love that era of technology, the 80s and 90s. Steve Jobs is a really fascinating figure to me. I think he's a tragic figure. I think he's a tragic figure. I think there's a story he told where he said like he stopped believing in God because he saw a starving child on the cover of a magazine, and you just go, you were Steve Jobs. Like the things you could have done to end world hunger, and here you were not believing in God because you didn't think that he would. That's fascinating to me. Now, I don't buy into the idea that like one specific person can end hunger, right? And Christ tells us the poor will always be with us. But I think you get my point. Steve Jobs is a fascinating figure. He's a tragic figure. And as far as entrepreneurs go, he's probably the most interesting one to me that I can think of at the moment.
Well, I think that I hosted a dinner for Catholic entrepreneurs in San Francisco a while back, and we talked about Steve Jobs, obviously, and it was like, well, in many cases, people say, oh, he was an asshole, he did all these harsh things, but in reality, perhaps you could look at the virtue of him pushing people to do their best work, right? Like not necessarily carrying it out in the way. Yeah, exactly. But you can look at these different lenses of what he could have achieved. And don't worry, I'm a big Steve Jobs fan. I've got a huge poster in my office here. So no, I appreciate that perspective. Who is one of your favorite saints? And there's probably many, so just feel free to,
I know this is going to be very, very cliche for a guy named Seamus Coughlin to say. So St. Patrick, I want to talk a little about St. Patrick, and then I just want to say a quick thing about St. Joseph. St. Patrick is fascinating because he's actually not given the credit that's due to him. He is the first documented writer in history to unequivocally condemn slavery, like without qualification. fascinating. No one you're not taught that in school. As far as like the great man theory of history goes, St. Patrick was a great man. Think about this. He was kidnapped, sold into slavery, then he was set free, and then he went back to the country that he was enslaved in, and he changed the country. And Catholicism's influence in Ireland was so vast that like within a generation of St. Patrick's death, slavery was all but ended. So this is a guy who was kidnapped by these crazy Irish people, and then somehow he was able to reason with them. I don't know how that was possible, but he converted the Irish. And then within a generation, slavery was almost completely gone in Ireland. So he went back to the place that enslaved him and ended slavery there. There's nobody like that in history. No one else exists like that in history. He's an incredible figure. I love St. Patrick. St. Joseph, I've talked about this before, but I owe my career to St. Joseph entirely. I prayed a novena to him on a couple of things, and it's a long story, so I won't tell the whole thing here, but he gave me a miracle that actually saved my career at one point.
Amazing. I like that. I'm actually in the middle of a Saint Joseph novena right now, so it gives me more hope again. Yeah.
Yes, it will do things.
My family has said St. Joseph's novenas a lot growing up. My dad's a carpenter, obviously, so it's
that's great.
It's very fitting for him to do so for looking for work, etc. But no, I appreciate that. And then what is your favorite religious devotion?
So I think it's important to say the rosary daily. And I listen. I say a lot of bad rosaries. I'm going to be honest. I just think it's important to say it at all. My rosaries could be better, but I think it's just really important to say a rosary every day. And as far as other devotions go, that's a good question. I mean, I wear the brown scapular. I think the brown scapular is very important. I would say, the rosary and the scapular are big ones. There's others I'm probably not thinking of right now, just because
the rosary,
I'm so exhausted with all the travel.
But
I would say the rosary and the scapular, and then just praying various novenas. I love praying to St. Joseph, praying to Mother Teresa, praying to St. Jude. I think those are the big novenas for me personally. I've actually only ever prayed one novena to Mother Teresa, but I think it was very, very effective. St. Teresa of Lisieux, prayed novenas to her. She's great. So I would say those are some devotions.
Yeah, I think the rosary, my favorite thing about the rosary specifically is just like the visible nature when you're walking around carrying it. People do recognize it. Sometimes, a lot of times they won't, acknowledge anything. But sometimes, like, I've had homeless people like be like, "Hey, that's a really nice rosary. I'm not a Christian or whatever." They're like, they know it. Nice. They know it, right? So that's really fun. But awesome, man. And then just one last time, you want to plug where people can go to help fund the project?
Absolutely. So right now, entertainment media is dominated by people who hate us. They hate our values. They hate our way of life. Myself and my team have a track record of having produced over 600 videos over the course of the last 10 years. We've amassed over 1 million subscribers, over 290 million views with $0 spent on marketing. We've got a very good track record on this. We're capable of producing animation very quickly and efficiently and very inexpensively relative to what animation usually costs. And now we are pushing back in the culture war by creating a full-length animated show, but we need your help. Time's running out. There's only so much time that we have to get this funded. I need you guys to go over to twistedplots.com, give $20. You'll be able to watch the pilot. You'll be able to see what the show's about. Also, shoot me a message if you're curious about what you're doing or you want to speak about it any further. What we're doing is necessary in order to change the culture. I really hope you guys will join me in the fight. Like I said, there's only so much time, but I believe what we're going to create here is going to be an absolute smash hit, and you can all be a part of it.
Awesome, man. I'm very excited that we were able to get you on and share this. I'm excited to see where you're going to go. I mean, I think that I believe that you have lots of belief in your future as well. But I just, like, to me, seeing people like you, like, this is still early in the journey. Yes, 1 million subscribers, cool. But just imagine 20, 30, 40 years from now, the things that you can achieve if you continue to lean into this. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, brother.
This has been a pleasure, and looking forward to seeing how this goes.
Thank you. God bless, man. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode with Seamus. I'd ask you this as a closer. Take a moment to ask God for the grace to desire Him above all things. Ask for Him to transform your heart. And if you care about bringing glory to His name, the first step is transforming your heart. Before any grandiose gestures, this is the first step, is asking God to transform our hearts. No actions, nothing else, no gestures are going to bring this about more than if we ask God for the grace to desire Him. We cannot achieve desire of Him truly even without His grace. So that's where it starts. Okay, take a moment to do that. I really appreciate you guys listening and tuning in. Happy building, and we'll see you next time on Catholic Founders.